The other thing going on in the West right now, I don't think they understand religious fanaticism.
No.
Religious fanaticism is a real thing. And when you have a very confused generation, they can get swept up in mass delusions of religious fanaticism because it's attractive. I don't belong to anything, I'm going to belong to something. It's got some sort of higher purpose.
Yeah.
And I'm willing to, quote unquote, sacrifice for it. Generally somebody else's life, not your own. It's a real challenge. The people who get this best, by the way, I think are the Saudis and the Emiratis who have spent years trying to, bring this down. But the West doesn't fully get it.
This is a Visegrad 24 series about the Israel-Hamas War.
My name is Stefan Tompson. I'm here with Visegrad 24, and we are on the ground in Israel to get the stories from Israelis, from the Jewish diaspora that has poured into the country to come and support Israel in this time of trial and tribulation. And today I'm here with Michael Eisenberg, the head of Aleph VC, one of the pillars of the VC community here in Israel. Michael, I think let's start with a controversial question. Are Jews good with money? You are.
I'm just an investor. I'm just a venture capitalist.
Yeah.
The way to think about this, and you know this yourself from your own experience, is that immigrants in general are good in meritocracies. Mm-hmm. It's not an accident that Sundar Pichai is running Google, or that Steve Jobs' family were immigrant families, or that Jensen Huang of NVIDIA is an immigrant to the United States. And unfortunately, for some bad reasons, anti-Semitism being one of them, Jews have been immigrants to a lot of countries. And if there's a meritocracy there, Jews tend to do well because they're kind of constantly immigrants in those places. And you also learn to be frugal in those places, which is, my great-grandfather immigrated to New York and New Jersey. He didn't have a nickel. And so you learn to be frugal and to be thoughtful about your money. And then try to be as successful as possible to kind of succeed in the meritocracy. And so I think that's just been the case forever. Add that to the fact that in the Middle Ages, it was illegal for Jews to be landowners, right? The Catholic Church at the time didn't enable or allow Jews to be landowners, so they had to become moneylenders. That was the business, and the Catholic Church, in fact, used them to be the moneylenders because Catholics couldn't do it. So I think there's been a history of Jews being investors and bankers, et cetera. And if you had the Medicis in Italy, you had the Rothschilds in France and England at the time. And so there's been kind of a history of being business people because you couldn't own land and you couldn't engage in certain professions also.
The Jewish diaspora and Jewish migrants are generally very successful. I mean, there's the very common trope of outperforming in Nobel Prizes, for example.
Yeah.
One of the industries that the Jews have known to overperform and outperform in is the media. And I wanted to ask you about there is a common anti-Semitic trope of, in fact, in some ways it's pro-Semitic, you might say, the accusation that Jews run the world. In a way, it's a sort of...
It's like only 14 million of us. Trust me, it ain't the case.
Yeah. This is what I wanted to ask you about the media and supposedly, how Zionists run the media. Why is it that the media is, in fact, the Western mainstream media is so often quite anti-Semitic or biased against Israel?
So anti-Semitism is a mind virus in which you identify something that you're bothered by and you say, oh, it's the Jews. That's what anti-Semitism is. It's just a mind virus, and it morphs all the time. So if you're angry at the media for whatever reason, you say the Jews control the media. If you're angry at wealthy people, you say the Jews are the wealthy people. If you're angry about, colonialist nonsense going on, you say Israel's a colonialist power, and therefore, they're the bad people. That anti-Semitism is just that mind virus, and it morphs and it morphs and it morphs and it morphs. The mainstream media, if anything, put it this way, if the Jews control the media, we do a really bad job of it. Because the mainstream media has been, super tough on the Jewish people and on Israel, and didn't stand up for what's going on at college campuses in America against Jewish people. The BBC has been falsifying reporting nonstop, whether it was the hospital in Gaza or a million other things, and is incredibly tough. So I think we actually don't do a good enough job of influencing the media, and we should get better at that.
Do you feel that Israel is part of the West?
That's a great question. So I'll take a step back. from that question. So I've written a bunch of books at the intersection of the Hebrew Bible and modern economics. And what I'm trying to articulate through that is we need to ask ourselves the question is, what is a unique Israeli democracy? What is a unique Israeli economy? And why is it different from the country? Israel is a part of the West in a very simple way, which is that the Judeo-Christian West emanates in large measure from the Ten Commandments and the evolution from them, whether it was Jesus branching off with Christianity or Rabbinic Judaism, which followed that path thereafter. It all emanates from the Hebrew Bible and the Ten Commandments, and those have become kind of linchpins of what has become the West. At the same time, Israel is part of this Arab region called the Middle East, and many Jews, more than 50% in this country, have come from North Africa and the Middle East, from Iraq and Syria and Iran, where they were thrown out of. There's like no Jews left in these places because they were expelled by these people after the foundation of the State of Israel. So Israel lives at this crossroads. Historically, this piece of geography is at the crossroads between Africa, Europe, and Asia, in this place called the Arabian Middle East, and it sits at the crossroads of 4 seas as well, right? The Indian Ocean, the Arabian Sea, the Red Sea, or the Reed Sea, and the Mediterranean. And so this was the crossroads. By the way, a funny tidbit, maybe not so funny, the gauze pad is named after Gaza. Yeah. Why is it named after Gaza? Because on the Via Maris, which is the trade route that ran along the sea and then went into Syria, etc., that's where the silk came from. On the southern trade route, the incense route, you got incense or medicines that came from what's now Saudi Arabia and those parts of the world. And so the silk met the medicine and the incense, and that became a gauze pad, some sort of medicinal pad, and was exported from what is now Gaza to Europe via the Mediterranean Sea. And so the geographic place of Israel sits at this crossroads of all the cultures of Asia and Europe, the island countries like Greece and Africa, and now what's now we call the Middle East, or the Arabian culture. And so this is kind of a mixing ground for all of these cultures. And I think that's opportunity, because I think, the Gulf countries are clearly becoming a very important part, almost fulfilling the role of Switzerland. What Switzerland fulfilled over the last 100 years, it feels to me like Abu Dhabi can fill over the coming 100 years. And Israel's like at this critical point where it can be a gateway for that. And so back to your question, is Israel part of the West? It's part of what I would call the value system of the Judeo-Christian values of the West, and it has an influence of this part of the world, the Middle East, both because of the Jews who have come here and because of kind of long-term cultural affinity to some of the parts of this world. Now, the one thing I'd add to that is the geopolitics of the world are such that it doesn't break down that neatly on geographic borders. We have an axis: Iran, Russia, China, North Korea. That's an axis. They're all testing their military hardware in this battle between Israel and Hamas and maybe Hezbollah. In this issue, there is no question that Israel is part of the West. It's part of the U.S. axis, which includes large parts of Western Europe, and I'd argue parts of the Arab world as well. In that regard.
Is the conflict that you're seeing now, as the Israel-Hamas War, as it's come to be known, why is that important to the West? Why should the West care about this? Why should we not just leave you guys to be and mind our own problems? When we do have problems, very serious problems in the West, we've got problems with mass migration, we've got problems with homelessness, with drug addiction, and you see this especially in the United States of America. Why should we care about what's going on here?
I think there's 3 levels to this. Now, one I've not spoken about, I'm actually writing about this right now, which is, this is a funny asymmetric war. What does that mean? We have one side that is bound by the rule of law and the laws of war, and one side that doesn't care. Like, my son serves in Gaza. He sees the same guy as a civilian, and 5 minutes later he comes out with a weapon. That's illegal, but that's how Hamas fights. And he said, you see a guy, he's a terrorist, but he's not in uniform, doesn't have a weapon. He goes into the front door of the house, he comes out the other side with a weapon and a vest, and he's coming to kill you. And so it's asymmetric, and they hide behind civilian populations. And if you're a law-abiding country, you don't want to do that. And the West has been fighting asymmetric wars. The war in the Ukraine is an asymmetric war. The Russians play by different rules than the Ukrainians or than the Americans or Poland or Germany play by. And this is a testing ground right now for how the West needs to think about the future of warfare, because we have a problem. Houston, we have a problem. There's a set of enemies that is not playing by the same rules that the West has imposed on itself. And this is the best way to kind of try to figure this out. And I don't think there's an easy answer. So that's point one. Point two, to the kind of comment you made, which is we got our own problems, which is mass immigration and homelessness, etc. What I think Israel is standing for right now is moral clarity. And it's moral clarity not just around what's right and what's wrong, but what kind of society we want to build. And every European country in particular, and the United States, is faced with this question right now. What kind of society do we want to build? And we need to make hard decisions. Borders are so porous, the world is changing so fast, the issues are so large that there's going to have to be large, meaningful, and unpopular decisions made by leadership to get after this, one of which has to do with the migrant population, but not only. And in order to preserve both the character of a country that's made it what it is, if you're the Netherlands or Poland or Italy, and to make sure these persist as free societies, which I'll come back to, you're going to have to create a freedom for the majority, a freedom for the culture to operate within. Otherwise, these countries will become a multicultural mess and will ultimately fall and no longer stand for that. That's the second reason you need to care. The third reason you need to care is, I know this is an inconvenient truth, we're actually in the middle of a global war. Israel is on the verge of peace and normalization with Saudi Arabia. There's a lot of people who don't want that to happen. Why don't you want that to happen? Well, Saudi Arabia's oil reserves and the Emirates' oil reserves helps keep the petrodollar going. The dollar is not backed by gold anymore. It's really backed by oil. And so keeping Saudi Arabia and the Emirates and this part of the world in the American sphere of influence is important for the United States of America's economy, the value of the dollar, the ability to print money and even borrow money.
And to be the reserve currency for the world.
Yeah, and to be the reserve currency for the world, it's super important. The world's shipping lanes are threatened by Iran and the Houthis and Russian-supplied missiles and Chinese-supplied weapons, etc. That is inflation in Germany and Italy if those shipping routes close.
Absolutely.
And what they did with Hamas is not just attack Israel. They tested the Western resolve. And what the Iranians are doing is testing the Western resolve. That's Hamas and Hezbollah. It's the Houthis on American ships and Western ships. And by the way, it's the marches in London and the marches in Paris and all over the place. The radical Islamic axis, together with China and Russia, is testing the West's resolve. Started in the Ukraine. It's now moved to Israel. It's in the Al-Mandeb Straits, Bab al-Mandeb, and into the Suez Canal. And we're being tested. And if you don't stop it, it continues.
I mean, it's also incredible to see the Houthis attacking the shipping lanes and literally that'll directly caused inflation in a few months. And you see these kids in the Western cities shouting, Yemen, Yemen, make us proud, turn another ship around. And it's sort of, they're literally attacking you. Their slogan is God is great, death to America, death to Israel, curse the Jews. Support, you see us shouting you support it, and turning ships around of products destined for Western countries. What's wrong with you?
They fired on a ship that had, I think, 1 million barrels of oil on it. What do you think does to the price of oil when ships don't want to go there? I think the other thing going on in the West right now is I don't think they understand religious fanaticism.
No.
And religious fanaticism is a real thing. And when you have a very confused generation, they can get swept up in mass delusions of religious fanaticism because it's attractive. I don't belong to anything. I'm going to belong to something. It's got some sort of higher purpose.
Yep.
And I'm willing to, quote unquote, sacrifice for it. Generally somebody else's life, not your own. And it's It's a real challenge, and we don't have people of the mindset that kind of get just how crazy, fanatical, diabolical the Iranian leadership is. The Houthis are, the Hamas is. Hamas is a radical Islamic jihadi organization. They are enraged killers. They are enraged religious fanatics. The people who get this best, by the way, I think, are the Saudis and the Emiratis, who have spent years trying to, bring this down. But the West doesn't fully get it.
So what can be done to explain these challenges to the West? I mean, Israel, the other thing we touched upon, the war being an asymmetric war. And it is an asymmetric war in the sense of Hamas is fighting one way, Israel is fighting bound by law. But you also have the asymmetry of, obviously, Hamas is a fairly weak organization fighting an established state with a fairly powerful army and far superior equipment. And then you have the asymmetry of the informational war, where Israel is winning with boots on the ground, but Israel is absolutely losing the war in terms of information. And why is this country with its amazing tech ecosystems, its outstanding tech and AI companies, and its technical savviness, why is it being defeated by an organization of terrorists who sort of, I mean, I'm not sure quite how to describe them. I'm looking for the right words to describe them, but in a sense, not particularly an advanced group of terrorists are winning the information war, and winning the information war not just within the community of 2 billion Muslims, which naturally will lean towards Palestine and the Gazan cause, but they're winning in the West, which should naturally be opposed to fundamentalist Islamists.
So there's a mistake that this is Hamas is winning the information war. It is Iran winning the information war. And there's a lot of Iranians. They're very smart. They're very sophisticated. And they've been preparing this for a decade. Think about the following. I think somebody sent this to me after I wrote about that Iran is testing the psychological forbearance of the Americans. They keep pushing and pushing. The Houthis is one thing, but as long as America won't attack Iran, they'll keep pushing because there's no price to be paid. And I think what the Iranians figured out, I think somebody sent this to me after I wrote it, is democratic countries change leadership every 4 to 8 years.
Sure.
What that also means in the flip-flop of American politics in particular is they also change strategy as it relates to Iran.
Yes.
And so therefore, if they just persist for 10, 15, 20 years, they will get to, with a consistent strategy, they'll get to the right place. They were ready for this from an information warfare perspective. It's not Hamas, it's Iran. It's not Hamas, it's Russia. It's not Hamas, it's TikTok, which is controlled by the Chinese Communist Party. And so this whole information war was ready. Now, Israel and the West was not ready for this because of massive flip-flops in policy as it relates to Iran, because it's been busy with 9 other things, because it's trying to get reelected every 4 years, which is a bug right now when you need kind of a longer-term horizon. Now, add that to the fact that the kind of culture, you've been to Israel a bunch of times, is what they call here tachlis. It's got to be real. And people here view narrative as not real. And so there is no time and money spent on storytelling and narrative, neither on the government level nor on societal level.
Interesting.
And Israel is culturally made for tachlis, for show me the boots on the ground. Show me what's real here. And this kind of fluff, or what they would call in German Luftgeschäft, called media and called narrative and storytelling, doesn't talk to Israelis.
Even though Israelis Jews have historically been excellent storytellers.
No, it's a mistake to kind of stereotype and generalize on that. There have been some Jewish people who have been good storytellers, like there's been Walt Disney, who was, by the way, an anti-Semite.
I was thinking of the Bible, actually.
Well, the Bible is the world's greatest story, right? And the most read piece of literature of all time. That was created 3,000 years ago. That, we've had some time since then to get worse at it.
I guess
so. Perhaps Darwinism has sifted out the storytellers. I don't know. But, there are gifted people who are storytellers, but this culture doesn't breed them. By the way, Netanyahu, I think, has been so long in office because he's a gifted storyteller. When we started our fund, the first hire we made was a woman who could help our entrepreneurs with storytelling, because they're not naturally good at it, and we thought that's a value we needed to add to the entrepreneurs here. It's still a big issue.
Interesting. What are some of the solutions that you've seen with your experience in the tech industry that can re-center the center of gravity of the narrative storytelling? Is there a way of solving this with tech? I mean, is there, for example, some of the guys that I've been talking to have deployed AI video making machines to make videos at scale? What are some of the solutions that you've been seeing?
I think there's a lot of technology solutions to try to scale things up and get better at it. But the foundational part of storytelling is a human being figuring out what is the arc of the narrative. Yes. And I think, candidly, we're not that good at it. I advised people in the Israeli government, I continue to advise them, that we'd be much better off outsourcing this to people like you and to friends in America,
sure,
who just are much better at this. And we better off spending our budget paying them than trying to do it ourselves. That's really my view.
It's what Ukrainians did.
Yeah, they did, and they did a brilliant job of it. It may or may not help with the war, but I think we are more advanced and more prepared than the Ukrainians perhaps were for a war. We are never going to be as prepared for an information war as people who are naturally well suited for this. You know, you can hear from my accent, I'm American. I grew up in America with storytelling, but most of my friends who grew up here, this place I've made my own for the last 30 years, don't grow up that storytelling is important. My kids, by the way, who grew up in my house, aren't sure that storytelling is important.
It's interesting because now that you say this, I'm starting to recognize the pattern. The Israelis that I've met who have grown up in the US, there's a better kind of flow to the way they speak and to the way there's an easier interaction, I guess, for me with them than there is with Israelis from born and raised here. It's an interesting point you make.
Yeah, they'll tell you the truth to your face all the time with the exact details and get it exactly right. But there won't be any narrative or arc to the story.
What comes after the defeat of Hamas? How does Israeli society go back to normal from here? It's been over 3 months now, and it does feel like the war in Gaza is being won. What are the next steps for Israel and for? I'm asking even from the perspective of the fact that I'm guessing that quite a lot of your companies, you've had people be called up to the reserves, and then they're no longer sort of working on the companies because they're out fighting or they're out in the reserves. Kind of how does society get back to normal after this?
You make an assumption that I'm not sure is correct, in that there is something called normal. And here's what I would say. So our companies, despite the fact that having 15 or 20% of their people called up to reserves, have delivered. No one's missed a delivery date. Wow. Pat Geisinger, the CEO of Intel, said that they lost, I forget how many employees to reserve duty, and they didn't miss a single wafer delivery.
Wow.
And that's what we've seen here. Just incredible resilience, delivery, commitment to that going on, and some of them have gotten more efficient during this period. I don't expect that this war, because I don't think it's the Israel-Hamas war, I think, as I said earlier, that this is a broader conflict, is ending anytime soon. I think we are in a period of war that will be constant and consistent for a while. And what gives me a lot of optimism about Israel, you've been here, you were here a month ago, you're here now, I think you see the resilience. And you see that society is basically functioning. And I think there are societies that are paralyzed by these things, and there's societies that are resilient. And I'd argue that Israel is in the top 0.1% of societal resilience in the world. And therefore, throughout what will be a long conflict, not just for Israel, I think you'll see it regionally and maybe in other places too, maybe taken to Europe in some way or past the Ukraine. It's hard to know right now. This is super unpredictable. But in this fog of uncertainty, Israeli resilience is going to show up, and Israeli optimism about the future is going to show up. And I think societies in the 21st century will be defined by civic resilience. How resilient is civilian populations? Because like we said before, the leadership is kind of out to lunch everywhere. It's a global phenomenon. And they're too busy being reelected and, doing memes and sound bites, and we have serious issues we need to confront. You said drugs, homelessness, migration, the nature of our societies, the values of our societies. These are demographics. These are serious issues we must confront, and that requires...
There does appear to be systemic failure in multiple Western states.
I think that Israel as a society which emphasizes equal rights on the one hand, but freedom of the majority on the other hand, which is, there's a covenant, this is the Jewish state, Arabs have equal rights, but it's the Jewish state. And we have to exercise the freedom for that majority in, I think, ways that will resonate in parts of Europe and perhaps the United States over time, which is we must empower the minority citizens of the population, and they should be invested in and help to succeed and enable them to be equal voting members of society. But we need to ensure in many countries that the majority is free to be able to exercise its culture and its values in that way. And I think the kind of free to open borders has undermined that. But I think the meta story, when you said the 90s was a blissful era, because it was pre-internet and it was pre-mobile phones. And what you really have going on under the surface is this giant tectonic shift in technology, which is the civilian population operates using WhatsApp and iPhones, and the government's still on Windows 95 in the best case. And so civilian populations are able to mobilize much faster. If you look, by the way, at the migrant population, the migrants that have come to the southern border of the United States, how do they get there? They're organized by WhatsApp, right? And then the U.S. government kind of laboriously, tries to get itself going because it's operating on Windows 95. And so civilian self-organization, which has, by the way, been the hallmark of this war, the Israeli civilian technology response, which has been built on WhatsApp and kind of quick coding tools, versus the laborious nature of the Israeli government in getting organized, has just shown how much faster, better, more advanced civilian organizations is. And this, by the way, I think is an incredible future message from Israel to the rest of the world, which is civic responsibility, taking responsibility for what's going on in the country, whether it's evacuees or the military supplies or whatever it is, by civilians, is the operating system of the 21st century, and it will be organized on, codename WhatsApp rather than on Windows 95. And the same problem is befalling England, France, Germany, United States.
But, and this is a big but, the reason that the civilian response in Israel has been the way it is because you do have a state built upon a cohesive idea. You are Jews. You're Israeli Jews. And I think, I don't know obviously to what extent the Israeli Arabs have been involved in that response, and I'm sure they have been to a certain extent, but there is the cohesiveness of Western societies leads me to believe that I don't necessarily think that you would see that kind of civic response anymore, because I don't necessarily think that there is a sense of the English. I don't, London is now minority white British. I don't know if Londoners would come together in a civic response to a crisis. I'm not certain.
I think if you want to be a citizen of a country and it has nothing to do with your skin color or your religion or anything like that, you should have to do military or national service. We have to force people into national service because we need to know that they adopt the core values of that country.
Yes.
Right? Because if they don't adopt the core values of that country, Houston, you're going to have a problem. And I think it's totally in line for the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom to say, we're really happy to have you in our country. You need to go through a year and a half of military training, or you need to do a year and a half of national service in some disadvantaged community. What Israel has going for it is not this kind of meta idea that Jews came here, which is helpful, but this focus on national service, this focus on military service, this focus on serving a cause that is greater than you. I've had a number of senators at my home. They asked me, what's the one piece of advice you give me? I said, reinstitute the draft in America, or reinstitute national service. I think the same thing is true. And I don't know if anyone's done a poll, but it'd be an interesting one. There are still countries in Europe with mandatory national service. I wonder if they're more cohesive and have more civilian responsibility. I don't know, but I think it's an interesting question to ask.
That's a great question to end on. Yeah. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Stefan.
Really appreciate it.
It was great. Yeah.